So there's this idea of the unconscious, that there is this larger self, if you like, that is not consciously held. And this connects with those parts of the self which are in shadow, or that we're cut off from. So somebody who has experienced a lot of traumatic experiences, suffering in their life, and who has cut off from them to protect themselves, will live out of a sort of conscious band of experience. Let's say it's sort of up here. However, that suffering, that violence, whatever it was, rests and is very much present in a certain sense within the unconscious. And so there's a number of effects of that. First of all, our perception of the world and our relationship with the outside world is created by a relationship with our innermost self and our unconscious self. So people who are resting on top of a lot of unconscious material will perceive events in the world and actually project onto events in the world that unconscious material. And so you can imagine that a lot of the intense discontent and psychological mobbing and violence going on in the world is in part due to this large ocean of shadow material suffering that is just below the surface, below the ground of the personality of the construct of the self is all of this suffering, and it's seeping out and popping out in all of these different ways. Another element of this unconscious trauma and its effect in the world is that it has a kind of magnetism, let's say, or gravity. Trauma is kind of like emotional dark matter, and so it attracts its other. It calls forth its reenactment, and so people with whatever pattern in their past that they've been unable to integrate, unable to really sit into, well, sort of, like I said, that conscious band, they'll be moving through that conscious band and somehow continually recreate and connect with and be attracted to people who also have some sort of corresponding material in their unconscious, and those two will connect together and sort of clash and play out. And that can be toxic relationship, and that can be toxic employer, and whatever it is, that relationship can play out over and over again. And throughout the course of somebody's life even, it can be, one relationship, and then years later another relationship. And one of the perhaps more hopeful aspects of this, what I call the telos of trauma. Telos is a Greek word. It means direction, or end point, an end destination, if you will. The telos of trauma is its resolution. The telos of trauma is love. That's what I'm saying. That's been my experience. And so with this clashing and drawing together, there is actually a telos that wants to reach the point where that clash can become a resolution, where the unconscious can be made conscious and resolved and integrated. And the way that can happen is arriving in the context, arriving in the relationships, in the relationship to life where there's an attending to what's going on, and there's actually an inquiry into the self. There's an inquiry into the somatic of the body, which is often where trauma is held. There's an inquiry into thought and the patterns of thought through things like meditation, mindfulness, and obviously psychedelics are one of the most powerful agents when it comes to making the unconscious conscious. What they tend to do is sort of bridge together and cause like a much higher degree of integration between the hemispheres of the brain than we usually experience. And with that, there's also a much deeper connection with the outside world. And so in the depths of that sort of deep integration, then this sort of the deeper layers of the self can sort of come forth and be revealed, and we have the opportunity to sit with that and integrate it. So in this way, the psychedelic renaissance that's going on, the mindfulness revolution that's going on, in correspondence with some of the more negative, the massive amount of polarization and all of that, all of these things are connected to the processes of integration and healing that occur ultimately on an individual level, but also on a social level. There's a sense in which both are interconnected. There's only so much that the individual can heal and integrate without then coming into connection with all of the lack of integration and healing outside of oneself. And the process of healing is a social process in a certain way, like we want to, in the process of becoming more aware, in the process of growing, which healing is a kind of growing process, we want to be connected with other people who are also undergoing that process, and to come into sort of right relationship with those people where we can learn together and be more of ourselves together. So that the collective nature of trauma, collective trauma as it's called, in relation to individual trauma, like how does that connect? Well, for me, the principal symbol that I found during my journey is a tree. And when I was going through a lot of intense suffering and trauma coming up, I found a lot of solace in nature and trees. And these trees really began to sort of imprint upon my conscious, imprint upon my patterns of thought, and I found them to be incredibly helpful. Obviously, trees are very beautiful, but they are also fractal, and they have this characteristic of roots and a single trunk and then branching outward. And so we can think of the self in this way. Often, we see the individual, and you see me, you see the trunk, and we're all individuals and we're all just trunks of trees, but actually what makes me is those roots in a meaningful sense, and those roots split off into all of my influences, my interactions, my family members, my relationships, my experiences. And those roots go beyond my lifetime in a certain way, because if I grew up in a context where there was a certain repression or trauma or something like that, that very often goes deeper than just one generation. It goes to the parents of your parents, and it goes to the parents of your parents' parents. And when we understand history, we see that the 20th century, which I was born at the very end of, was one of the most horrific centuries in many ways. You have two enormously psychologically damaging conflicts in the course of one lifetime. My grandfather was in the Second World War. My great-grandfather, grandfathers on two different sides were in the First World War. And so a huge amount of just psychically shattering, fragmenting, soul scarring, really violence against the soul occurred when these young men were sent to kill in the name of king and country. And very little of that was integrated. Those guys came home to a culture which was Victorian in its values, so there was no emotional expression. There was no room for that. They were sent back and expected to go on, to go to work. After the First World War, there was a kind of what was described, I think, as a kind of ghost generation, and all of these guys that were sort of there, but not there. And that's because where they really were was back on the battlefield, back in the trenches. And I think, a similar degree of that occurred in the Second World War as well, in different ways. And so they came home and there was no integration. And they kept that suffering, that violence in their souls, in their bodies, in their hearts. And they kept it to themselves for the rest of their lives. Many of them had violent outbursts, which would be confined to the home. So whilst this trauma was never sort of allowed to have a collective healing, it had its impact, and it flowed out in the violence and aggression that was and then enacted against the children. It very often unconscious material like this would come out in dreams. And I know with my own grandfather who fought the Japanese in the Second World War, that it was coming out in his dreams, and many other soldiers' stories reported of having these nightmares and waking up and strangling their wives because they believe that a Japanese soldier is about to kill them in their sleep. So it's heavy, and it's recent, and it's widespread, and it's not just us, British people, it's German people, it's French people, it's Italians, Poles, Russians, Chinese had their own version of this, Japanese. None of these cultures have really undergone collective healing. None of them have integrated the tools that would necessitate that. And I don't want to paint, a horrible negative picture, because there has been beauty created, there has been art created. People have gone on with their lives, and, many people were able to sort of get along, but we can't afford to ignore this depth of unconscious material, because it is the ocean on which we swim, on which we float. And it is partly why we feel so ungrounded at this stage in modernity, I think, is the lack of rooting into the horror and experience of the last century. And there are things before that, you know, there is the experience of sort of 2,000 years of Christianity in the West coming to an abrupt ending and just having God sort of gone. And that was sort of the underlying substrate of the culture and understanding of what it is to live a life. And that was completely gone. So that's obviously an ungrounding experience. Cutting off from the land, as I mentioned before, industrialization, the loss of relationship to place, the loss of relationship to nature. And so you can see there is a multi-layered quality to this collective soil. And I think the work of this generation, of this century, of the sort of shamanic awakening that's occurring, of the collective healing that's occurring, is to become rooted in that depth. And from that depth, to actually draw up that energy and to allow it to flow through and to create and to become flexible and adaptive and grounded in that history. This landscape of trauma is all around us. It's a living landscape. It's an embodied landscape in the sense that it's in the bodies of people all around you. As you're walking past somebody in the street, you can't necessarily see it. You can't necessarily tell when you're interacting with somebody, but everybody to some degree is cut off in some way from something, and the depth and the how much we are cut off from is really the question. And the aesthetic quality, the sort of visual, material quality of this landscape is that we used to build beautiful things. We used to build places where people could live, like towns. And I don't think it's a coincidence that coincidental that the loss of beauty, the erasure of beauty, the creation of some of the most soul-destroying, dehumanizing architecture, which really just provokes a feeling of emptiness for me, or an absence. Whether you're talking about sort of the brutalist postmodern concrete blocks of flats that sort of scour the landscape of every town and city in Western Europe, or you're talking about the utopia of glass and steel that makes up the banks and the new city high-rises. And the effect of this kind of stuff is that when we look up, we are not inspired. We are not looking up, and we're not looking up at things which exalt the heavens, which make us look up inspired. They make us look up, and then we look down, and then we walk faster and get on with it, because these buildings are made quickly, and they're not made with care, and they're not made with any sense of the sacred. And so we don't experience a sense of the sacred. And so life becomes less sacred. want us to build beautiful things again. I want us to build places that people want to live. I want things to be built by people with a felt sense of the sacred, whatever that means to them, to be connected in that deep way with the process of creation. And the only way that we are going to get there is to root down and get into that darkness and connect with it and understand why we are where we are, at the end of this trip, this historical trip that we've been on that's taken us from living on farms and going to church on Sundays to living in godless, materialistic cities and using digital devices and all of the aspects that put us in this sort of hyper-modern state. And there's a lot of great stuff as well, in that soil. It's not just the collective soil of trauma. It's also history and art and philosophy and religion. And there's so much there. There's such a vastness that we are on top of, that many people are now beginning to inquire into and pull through these threads and find, actually many of the answers, if you like, or the principles that we can draw upon. How do we build beautiful things? How do we engage in thinking, this stuff can be drawn up into the present, to deepen the present, to deepen our felt sense of the present in a way that can then flow through into what we create and into how we relate with one another. And it's through this deepening and this rooting and branching process that I think we are going to be able to have this, regenaissance and regenerate and recreate and build a new future through speaking it into existence one moment at a time. But we are not going to do it if we're walking around on top of all of the things in our childhood and all the things in our parents' childhood and their parents and the wars and the horror and all of it's not being connected with. So, I'll leave it at that.